Okay, thank you again for joining us this morning. California Common Cause is excited to welcome you to the launch of our new initiative, the California Institute for Technology and Democracy. CITED seeks state-level solutions to the threats that disinformation, AI, deepfakes, and other emerging technologies pose to our democracy and our elections. I'm Jonathan Metha-Stein, the Executive Director at California Common Cause. Today, we'll have a launch announcement and press conference for our first 30 minutes from 9:30 to 10, followed by a panel event with leading experts. I want to start today by reflecting on the fact that around the nation and in some places in California, today is Election Day. We are 1 year out from the monumental 2024 presidential election. We know our democracy is already weakened, with trust in institutions and media at all-time lows, and deep voter participation disparities leaving certain communities out of our electorate. In that challenging environment, we are now entering our first ever AI election, in which generative AI deepfakes will inundate our political discourse, and voters may not know what images, audio, or video they can trust. Candidates, conspiracy theorists, foreign states, and online trolls all will have powerful tools to destabilize our information ecosystems beyond repair. What we will see in the next year ranges from the silly stuff that's not that silly, maybe fake video of Joe Biden falling down the stairs of Air Force One, to deeply pernicious, perhaps false audio of an elections official caught on tape saying that vote-by-mail ballots aren't secure. In a few clicks, using current technology, bad actors now have the power to spoof an entire county elections website to distribute false information to voters, or to create a fake local news website to plant false stories. The public has not yet realized a simple truth that is coming at them like a Mack truck. Left unaddressed, AI and disinformation are an existential threat to our democracy and our elections. And just as the problem is peaking, social media platforms are walking away from any responsibility to address it. YouTube, Meta, and X have now all stopped labeling or removing posts that repeat Trump's false claims of a stolen 2020 election. Facebook has made their fact-checking features optional. Twitter has stopped utilizing a software tool that identifies organized disinformation campaigns spreading across their platform. And all of the platforms have laid off key members of their trust, safety, and civic integrity teams. It is time for assertive action from government, philanthropy, and civil society. And to help to make that happen, we now introduce to you the California Institute for Technology and Democracy, a project of California Common Cause.
As America approaches the 2024 elections, an already weakened democracy faces unprecedented challenges. Those who undermine the legitimacy of our elections are still at the heart of our politics. Access to the vote and election officials themselves will be under threat. Candidates, foreign enemies, and non-state actors will spread lies and disinformation. And artificial intelligence carries the power to accelerate it all. But in California, we aren't afraid of hard problems. We have embraced big solutions. We can and will innovate in the private and public sectors to meet the moment. Introducing the California Institute for Technology and Democracy, CITED, a source of solutions and expertise to combat the threats that disinformation, AI, deepfakes, and other emerging technologies pose to our democracy and elections. CITED combines the thinking of leaders in tech, finance, academia, law, public policy, and communications. Our goal? Develop the state's first policy platform to fight digital threats to our elections and democracy, and provide policymakers, regulators, the press, and the California public with expertise and analysis in a way that is totally divorced from partisanship and ideology. California Common Cause is proud to announce this first in the state, in any state, effort. Welcome to CITED.
Folks, as we too painfully know, Congress has unfortunately not shown itself capable of advancing meaningful reforms to meet the challenges our democracy now faces. As a result, it falls to states like California to fill this dangerous leadership void. Fortunately, California is uniquely positioned for the task. As the birthplace of key tech innovations, California policymakers have easy access to tech expertise in crafting reforms, and policy advances in California have often served as a model for other states, and in some cases actually driven nationwide change because of the business pressures that California can place on industry. That is our aspiration here. But the missing piece for Sacramento and our state is an unbiased and nonpartisan organization like CITED that can provide California with guidance and leadership, wholly independent of industry, but also cognizant of industry's incentives and business models because of our interdisciplinary expertise. So what will CITED do? CITED will supply California policymakers, the press, and the public at large with the impartial expertise necessary to meet this critical moment. It will provide analysis of policy proposals from California, DC, and international actors. It will make legislative recommendations and develop new state-level policy proposals. It will do mass voter education, and it will offer public leadership, meaning op-eds, social media commentary, and events at the intersection of democracy and technology. And CITED will do all of it in a way that is interdisciplinary and nonpartisan. Our advisory councils include leaders from civil rights and civic engagement, law and public policy, industry and tech, and more. Our advisors include a former Democratic leader and a former Republican leader of the state legislature, former civic trust and integrity executives from the nation's largest social media platforms, leading academics studying cybersecurity and digital threats, and many others. This is a new policy field. We are building as we go. We do not have all the answers. No one does. But we invite you to partner with us as we search for a way forward that protects voters, our communities, and our democracy. We have an amazing collection of speakers at this launch event, followed by a panel of experts who will dive deeper into the issues. As we move through the speakers in the next 20 minutes, we welcome your questions in the Q&A box. I will moderate the Q&A at the end. Our first speaker this morning, I am excited to introduce Assemblymember Gail Pellerin, who represents California's 28th Assembly District and serves as the chair of the Assembly Elections Committee. Hi, Gail. Before serving in the legislature, Assemblymember Pellerin was the chief elections official in Santa Cruz County for 27 years. Assemblymember, thank you for being here, and please take it away.
Thank you, Jonathan. I am excited about CITED and very honored to be here. As the chair of the Assembly Elections Committee and an elections official with more than 27 years of experience under my belt, I know how dangerous AI, disinformation, and deep fakes can be. And it's happening here in California when the rogue Shasta County Board of Supervisors bought into the big lie and threw out their state-certified, federally qualified voting system made by Dominion Voting System earlier this year and insisted that the county clerk move to a hand-counted paper ballot system. I responded by introducing AB 969. AB 969 was signed into law and requires all counties in California to use a qualifying voting system that is secure, accurate, transparent, and accessible. And if they want to change voting systems, they must have a new contract ready to go so the transition is seamless. In addition, the law prohibits counties in elections with 1,000 or more voters from using hand counting as their vote tallying system. And for special elections, that threshold jumps to 5,000 voters. These disinformation narratives aren't just undermining our voters' faith in our election system, they are making the lives more dangerous for elections officials. In 11 Western states, more than 160 chief local elections officials have left their positions since November of 2020. This represents roughly 40% of the total chief local election officials in the region. And these officials took with them more than 1,800 years of combined experience. AI will only accelerate disinformation further. Anyone with a keyboard can make fake videos, images, or audio files that add fuel to conspiracy theories or contradict the good information that elections officials are trying to put out into the world. Solutions are needed, and they're needed fast. The legislature, and myself included, are hungry for these thoughtful solutions. I'm actually happy to report that we were a little forward thinking on this issue. And in 2019, the state legislature passed AB 730 by Assemblymember Mark Berman that prohibits the distribution of deceptive audio or visual material with actual malice, with intent to injure a candidate's reputation or to deceive voters, unless what is distributed includes a disclosure that it has been manipulated. And we extended the sunset of that law last year to January of 2027. The legislature has also established the Office of Election Cybersecurity in the Secretary of State's office, and the office is dedicated to keeping every Californian's vote safe from online interference, especially the spread of mis and disinformation. I'm super excited about the approach CITED is taking to bring together a diverse group of technology, policy, civic engagement, and academic experts to provide policymakers like me with unbiased information to help us address these enormous threats. I look forward to partnering with CITED on future legislation, starting as early as next month. So thank you so much for having me here today.
Thank you so much, Assembly Member. We cannot wait to start working with you to tackle these threats in the legislatures. Thank you again for being here. Our next speaker is Dr. Sam Blakesley. Sam served as a California state senator and state assembly member, including service as the assembly minority leader, representing the Central Coast. Upon leaving the legislature, Sam founded the Institute for Advanced Technology and Public Policy at Cal Poly San Luis Obispo. Sam is also a former research geophysicist and was a leading proponent of Proposition 54, a constitutional amendment that brought much needed transparency to the California state legislature. Sam, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Jonathan. It's a real treat to be with you and everyone on this call. And I want to just share a couple of things that have informed my perspective on this issue that I think may be relevant. And as you mentioned, earlier in my professional life, I worked as a PhD scientist for what was at the time the largest Fortune 500 company on the exchange, and then moved into a role as a strategic planner. My responsibility was to help understand how to move technology from lab settings to affiliates around the world, and some of the challenges and opportunities that actually go into commercializing technologies. And what I found was that technology is a very difficult entity to control, to predict, to manage, and it, in fact, can become viral. It changes in ways that are unpredictable, and as scientists and technologists, and I was one, it's very difficult to know how it will impact the world once you let it loose into the wild, into the native environment where it essentially evolves based on its usage. So first is that background as a technologist, scientist, someone who worked to commercialize advanced technologies. But second is my life in politics. I served again in the California State Assembly, where after Kevin McCarthy left, I was voted the Republican leader in the California State Assembly. I later served as state senator representing 5 counties, including Santa Clara County, which is home to Silicon Valley. And during that time, I saw firsthand just how difficult it is for legislators to grapple with issues related deeply to matters that are evolving in science and technology and medicine. And having seen that difficulty that legislators face, what I observed is that it's very easy for legislators to be overwhelmed with information from headlines and newspapers that may not be particularly well informed on the subject. And oftentimes there's a fear-based approach toward managing technology, and a precautionary principle essentially dissuades technology from having some of the good impacts it could. And the other end of the spectrum, what I've seen is that armies of lobbyists who are paid to stop legislation, or worse, direct it and control it so it helps those industries, puts legislators in an almost impossible position where they're told they have to do something, but they're really lacking advice from objective and third-party voices that can provide input and insight into what is actually good public policy. And so it's because of those two experiences in my life, I'm very enthusiastic about what CITED is doing, and honored to attempt to bring my background to bear on this. But there's another reason why I think it's very important that this is the time for this to occur. California, as mentioned before, has a history of leading on difficult and emerging technologies. We are the home of Silicon Valley. Unlike Washington, D.C., we in Sacramento have a tradition of passing literally hundreds of bills each session that deal with some of the most difficult issues facing society. And the other reason I'm excited about this as a former Republican leader is this is one of those few issues that have not yet been partisanized. We are not in a position where there's a Republican or a Democrat solution, or a decision to not have a solution on this difficult policy issue. It is a nascent technology where both parties have seen firsthand the perils and difficulties of waiting too late to legislate around issues, for example, that deal with social media, which we've seen have impacted our elections and people's confidence in our institutions. So this is an opportunity, not only because California can lead, but because we can develop bipartisan solutions which can be implemented and we believe ultimately transmitted to Washington as examples of how to grapple with these problems intelligently and wisely. And thank you, Jonathan, for the opportunity to share those thoughts.
Thank you so much, Sam. We appreciate your thoughts today and your partnership on this effort. It's great to be with you. Up next, our final speaker, before we move to question and answers, and please put those questions in the Q&A box, folks, is Ishan Mehta, no relation. Ishan is the director of the Media and Democracy Program at the National Common Cause Office based in Washington, D.C. Ishan came to Common Cause from the U.S. Senate, where he worked on technology and telecom issues. Prior to that, he worked at a Washington, D.C. think tank on cybersecurity and national security policy. Ishan is actually a computer engineer by training and worked for Intel in Silicon Valley before pivoting to public policy. Ishan.
Yeah, thanks so much, Jonathan, and good morning. I am honored to be speaking today at the launch of CITED, the first of its kind state-level effort to combat the challenges to democracy posed by emerging technologies. I know from personal experience the difficulty of enacting technology regulations, comprehensive or modest, at the federal level. Partisanship and relentless lobbying has meant that Congress has been in a stalemate on these issues and hasn't been able to make meaningful progress on items like privacy, disinformation, platform regulation for years, really. There are some encouraging signs. There's bipartisan legislation and effort to tackle AI by Leader Schumer's working group. But with another shutdown looming in a few weeks, technology policy proposals have a difficult path ahead in the 118th Congress. Common Cause has a long history working in technology policy and disinformation. We launched one of the first disinformation monitoring efforts back in 2016. We have led a social media monitoring effort during federal and state elections, working with the Election Protection Coalition, having developed tools to respond to mis and disinformation content and other rapid response techniques. As we speak, our team is monitoring elections in Ohio, Texas, and other states that are going to the poll today. Since 2016, we've seen the threat grow in succeeding years. Disinformation has always been on an exponential rise and has no signs of going down. The advent of generative AI, deepfakes, and other technologies means that not only will disinformation increase in the rate of spread, but also the effectiveness of the deceit gets better. And thereby it contributes to the ongoing erosion of trust in our public institutions. In this environment, with Congress, in a stalemate and disinformation rising exponentially, it is critical that states pick up work in the space where Congress has ceded responsibility. As Jonathan and others have stated, it makes sense that the first such effort is in California, a state that is home to the largest technology companies in the world, but also a state that has a track record of leading the nation in technology policy regulation. While there are efforts at the federal level, CITED is the first initiative that I know of that is focused on tackling disinformation, AI, deepfakes, and other emerging technologies at the state level. Big congrats to Jonathan and his team for taking on this important initiative, and we all wish him the best of luck going forward.
Thank you, Ishan. I appreciate your comments and your support. I'm going to now facilitate question and answer. But before I do that, I want to bring on Drew Liebert to participate in the Q&A. Drew is CITED's founding director. Hello, Drew. To those of you in the audience today who don't know Drew was one of the longest serving senior staff in the California State Legislature. He most recently served as chief of staff to then Senate Majority Leader Bob Hertzberg. But Drew's principal legislative role was chief counsel to the Assembly Judiciary Committee for almost 2 decades. And because of his legal and policy expertise, Drew has been honored as a California Lawyer of the Year, and we're honored to call him CITED's first director. Thank you for being here, Drew. And Alex, if I can ask you to bring all of our speakers, Sam and Ishan, back up, we are going to facilitate some question and answer. So the first, I'd like to just go to Ishan, you're working at the federal level, and last week the big news on AI was that the Biden White House released its executive order. What do you make of it? And does this mean the federal government is effectively leading on these issues? Does the executive order touch democracy in the way that we'd like it to? Can you speak on that as we get warmed up here for Q&A?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a really great start to regulating AI. I think the administration, is rightly calling it the first time, the most leading regulation of AI that any country has put forward till now. But in our federal system, executive orders are not a replacement for legislation or for congressional action, and there are things that we all agree that need to be done to curb AI-enabled disinformation that only Congress can do, and Congress has the authority to do. Sort of to sum up, I think it's a great start. It's really encouraging to see this sort of whole of government mobilization to understand and combat the sort of harms of AI, but especially on the issues we're talking about on democracy and its intersection with technology, we really are looking to Congress to step up.
Thank you, Ishan. We have a number of questions in the chat about what state level legislation might look like from Titus, and then from Laura. We have a question for Assemblymember Pellerin, who unfortunately had to leave us. But basically the same question is, what is the legislation that CITED or Assemblymember Pellerin is looking for? And obviously we can't speak for the Assembly member, but I'll just say that this is a new policy field still developing. And so we are currently investigating a number of possible policy solutions. We're looking at digital watermarking. We're looking at deepfake labeling. We're looking at algorithmic transparency. We're looking at the possibility of escalating levels of friction. These are all sort of new ideas emerging in the space. We're also looking at how a broader set of issues impact this. So funding and supporting good, honest, unbiased, nonpartisan local news puts more good news into the world to combat fake news. Better civics education and digital media literacy for our young people helps inoculate them from disinformation and deepfakes when they become voters. These are all part of a policy agenda that Drew and the team at CITED will be rolling out over the course of the next several months. Folks on the call today who are following our work can look for an event in the Capitol in January in which we will be rolling out a set of legislative recommendations and ideas. A question from the chat for any Common Cause member, and I guess that will be me. Shasta County elections official did end up using an electronic vote counting system for today's elections. Have you heard of any issues or intimidation today as that election is underway? So it's only 10 a.m. and we haven't had the opportunity to check in with our colleagues and partners who are on the ground in Shasta County. Obviously, we've been paying close attention to the issue and wrote a letter to the Secretary of State calling on her to make the state law clear and to make clear what governs the election today, the special election today in Shasta County. We're proud that the state, both the press and the policymaking infrastructure in Sacramento is paying attention to what's happening in Shasta County. We have not heard yet of any issues or conflict on the ground in Shasta County. But the day is early, and we're partnered with Disability Rights California and a number of other organizations that are in Shasta County today monitoring the vote. Let's see. Will you consider or be able to advise advocates and legislatures in other states if asked? Drew, can I send that question to you?
Absolutely, Jonathan, and greetings, everyone. It's really delightful to be with all of you. The answer is absolutely. We are very aware of the fact that California has been a leader on technology issues for many years. We've got a fabulous staff, legislative staff in California who are experts on these issues that we hope to work with. And, California has led the way on privacy legislation, so much so that over 16 states across the country have already used California's work as a model. We have every expectation that will be the exact process that we see if we pursue some really powerful AI and social media regulatory efforts as well here, that we will see other states turning to California as a model. And I will add just one other point to that, Jonathan, and that is that we've talked about legislation as certainly a key part of our plan. But I want to make clear that we also very much intend to work as best we can with the tech platforms to see what we can potentially do collaboratively. We know that Microsoft and other platforms have over the years expressed interest in trying to come up with approaches that will address some of these great democracy dangers. So we don't think that there's just a stick approach here. We think there's a carrot approach as well.
Thanks, Drew. Another question from the chat. Do we see any freedom of speech implications for restricting the use of AI in creating digital media? And the answer there is, of course, there's a ton of First Amendment questions, some of them very, very tricky. And one of the reasons why we're proud to bring interdisciplinary expertise to this question here at CITED is that by having folks who are leaders in tech and have done content moderation work professionally, we can identify solutions that work with existing technology, don't break business models or break technology. And on the other hand, by having legal scholars and civil rights leaders and so forth as part of the effort, we also can avoid First Amendment problems, conflict with Section 230 or other parts of federal law that may make California's road more difficult. We're hopeful that having a diverse set of perspectives in the work ensures that we're navigating all of the different challenges in making state-level policy. Let's see here. There's several questions in the chat about the idea that essentially California is making policy that then other states may replicate that or make their own policy. And do we create a situation in which we have a number of different states with different approaches or laws on this issue, and the inconsistency makes it hard to govern or to ensure implementation? Does anyone want to take, we've thought about this, of course. Does anyone want to take that question as our last question today before we wrap up and move to our next section?
Yeah, I'm happy to answer because, I think there were a lot of conversations about preemption when we were talking about privacy law. And that was sort of the argument a lot of the companies would make that, without sort of federal preemption, there's going to be a patchwork of state laws and things will become sort of ungovernable or cause confusion for consumers. But I think very firmly right now, the balance is on the other side. People are without any sort of protections from consumer protections from states or federally. So I think, worrying about too many competing frameworks right now is premature. Let's get something on the books and, sort of make the first foray before we worry about, competing ideas.
Thanks, Ishan. We have more to say on that topic and an answer to lots of the different questions in the chat that we didn't get to. The good news is we're open to working with anyone and everyone who has something to say on this topic. So you can find CITED at cited.tech, 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 and you can email us at info@cited.tech. Again, info@cited.tech. If you have a question that you didn't get answered, or you had a thought that you didn't get to share, email us and we welcome the conversation. I want to thank our panelists, Ishan, Sam, thank you so much. A big thank you to Assemblymember Pellerin. We are thrilled to be working with you. We're now going to transition to the second half of our event today, which is our panel event with experts. And so Drew, welcome again. Thank you for being my partner in crime on this work. And I'm going to hand the reins over to you for the next hour.
Well, thank you so much, Jonathan. It is actually really encouraging to get these kind of votes of support of our work with some key state policymakers and all of those great folks who are working on policy. It was also helpful to be reminded why we can't wait for Congress to act. We're all watching what's happening in Congress these days and recognize that it really is falling to the states, for better or for worse, to kind of fill these gaps that are so critically needed for protecting our democracy. It's just the way it is right now. So we are very much open to trying to pick up that baton. I want to tell you how much we appreciate all of you joining today, because we know you've got a lot of other things you could be doing. And this is your own way of demonstrating your commitment, obviously, and concern about democracy. So we thank you for that. And a special shout out to Steve Berger and Christian Storm, who are founding partners who really have helped create this process for us. And we've just got this wonderful collection of extraordinary folks on our team already, from Bill Monning, who was the majority leader of the state Senate, and just a host of other great folks who are joining us in this effort. So thank you all for the work that you're doing with us. So it's now my honor to moderate our panel this morning, which is going to be really, I think, very thoughtful. As you know, it's entitled The Threats AI and Disinformation Are Posing to Our Elections and How We Can Respond. We're trying to figure that out and are glad that you are too. As you will see, we have an extraordinary collection of experts reflecting really a broad group of experience and expertise that we brought together, that we hope will be resources for the staff of the legislature, members of the legislature, policymakers, and the regulatory agencies, and the press, of course, as well, and just members of the public who have so many questions about what's happening now in technology. We know there's going to be absolutely an onslaught of bills this coming year in the legislature about AI and social media, and we want to be there to help address those issues as best we can. I'm going to tell you about their impressive backgrounds as we go through, but first I want to remind you all about what I call the truth dangers that will be confronting California voters just around the corner. It's amazing how soon this next election is coming. Some of you have probably seen this really incredible deep fake video of actor Morgan Freeman. But I have to tell you, no matter how many times I've seen it, I really get the shivers. So I want to show it to you right now.
I am not Morgan Freeman, and what you see is not real. Well, at least in contemporary terms, it is not. What if I were to tell you that I am not even a human being? Would you believe me? What is your perception of reality?
I mean, think about that. It's remarkable, right? Actually, Morgan Freeman didn't do that. This was I think it was a Dutch or a Danish company that does AI that was able to take Morgan Freeman's voice and take his image and create that, meaning that could be done with any of us. In fact, what we don't realize, most of us, is just how easy it is for anyone to make one of these incredible deep fake videos now. You don't need highly technical skills. In fact, I want to show you a deep fake of that one of our CITED members just for fun made in literally 5 minutes. I'm not kidding you, 5 minutes using existing AI tools. Now you have to take a very close look at my face, only for purposes right now of this next video. And you will see what is about to hit us in an onslaught in the upcoming election.
If we're ever going to tackle the problems of the 1970s, we need all the strength a young man can give. Bill McKay has it. The conviction to push for real solutions to the problems of unemployment, poverty, and crime. The determination to put some action back into the United States Senate. The energy to fight the special interests on behalf of all the people of California. For a better way, Bill McKay.
You might just make it, my friend. I get the feeling you know where you're going.
I don't.
Well, there, needless to say, have been many of my friends who have now seen this deep fake video of me attempting to look like Robert Redford. And they've said, yeah, that's true. You don't know where you're going. But I'm glad to be going with all of you on this important journey. And obviously, the point of this showing you this deep fake, besides how much I'd like to look like Robert Redford, is that anyone with really almost no skills at all now on a computer can create a deep fake like this. If our CITED member had spent literally an hour on it rather than 5 minutes, you would have seen a deep fake tool a video that looked just like the Morgan Freeman one. So we now want to present really, if you will, a really important group of people to chat with you a little bit about what their own perspectives are on how we might start to address some of these critically important issues. I want to start this morning with a Common Cause board member who's a real leader on these issues, Angelica Salceda, who is the director of the ACLU of Northern California's Democracy and Civic Engagement program. I know there Angelica supervises and supports a really impressive team of attorneys dealing with voting rights, open government, and free speech issues. And I know, Angelica, you're hearing about free speech issues all the time in your organization. As a director and staff attorney, Angelica has been counsel on various democracy and free speech related cases, and has also helped draft really important legislation to strengthen California's voting rights law. So, Angelica, if you could just chat with us just a touch, and then I've got some questions up my sleeve for you.
Sure. Good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here today and to be sharing some of the insights, some of our fears, some of our concerns, and really hopes in this era of AI and the future of our democracy. I think one thing that we can all agree on is that AI tools can create efficiencies in our lives, but just as these AI tools can help answer basic and some complex questions, they can and do create real world harms. And if we don't properly mitigate against those harms can just sow further distrust in our democratic institutions. What we know is that these AI systems are reshaping and influencing core social media domains that impact our daily lives, from the criminal legal system to education, housing, hiring, and so many more areas. And we also know that AI is built by humans who have biases and world beliefs. So it's inevitable that these same biases and points of views can and do appear in AI tools. And I think in recent times, we've seen plenty of examples that we can learn from. So we know that private companies and government agencies have long used AI tools to make decisions that impact our daily lives, like what ads to show us on social media, predictors about what shows or movies we might want to watch, or what political posts we may want to read, because an AI tool decides that ad might align with our worldview. And we've also seen AI being used in police surveillance, hiring and housing decisions, just to name a few more examples. And in these settings, we've seen the enormous danger that these tools pose in exacerbating existing discrimination in our democracy systems based on race, sex, disability, and other protected characteristics. And after all, the point of AI is that it claims to make predictions about future outcomes based on a set of data that it's being fed. But for those of us who have worked with data, we know that data can often be flawed. It can be riddled with data gaps and contradictions and reflective of institutional and systemic biases. Much of the recent policy focus has been on the concerns of the use of AI tools for national security and law enforcement purposes, and I think rightly so. But I think now it's also time for us to focus on how these same tools can be misused to improperly influence and manipulate our democratic processes. What we've seen and what we can plan to continue seeing is how AI is used to create and spread sophisticated content, whether real or not, that can pose a threat to the integrity of elections and the democratic decision-making process. And I know that we're all worried about the fake campaign videos like the one we just watched, and we should be, but I also want to challenge us to worry about the ways AI is being used to target specific demographics with certain messages and campaign content and how it could potentially disenfranchise certain groups of voters. We can all certainly, I think, imagine a scenario where AI is used to only target, for example, limited English speaking voters and spread false information about polling locations or voting opportunities. I mean, like, even without the use of AI, we've seen some unscrupulous campaigns use these tactics. So I think now imagine these same tactics supercharged with the use of AI to identify and target historically disenfranchised voters. The use of AI is widespread and it's only growing. And it's having already a profound impact on our liberties and rights. And while AI poses many challenges, I'm also hopeful that with the help of this group, California will lead the charge in crafting thoughtful and meaningful policy changes. Over to you, Drew.
Thank you very, very much. That was so thoughtful. And I want to ask you, Angelica, have you actually seen any evidence yet of there kind of being efforts at manipulating individual communities in the election cycle that we're already now starting?
So I think one of the challenges right now is that we don't exactly know when and how AI is being used, including in this election cycle. So certainly we've all seen that AI can manipulate or create images or videos. We've seen that today. But we're in this moment where many of us are just trying to make sense of what this new technology is and all of the things that are possible with it. Personally, I'll say that now when I find myself listening to a campaign video or a TV ad, I wonder whether any aspect of that video, including voiceovers, are AI generated. I don't have a trained eye or ear to know the difference right now. And I wouldn't be surprised if my experience is also reflective of the average voter. All that being said, I do seriously worry about AI schemes suppressing voter participation, both generally, but also in vulnerable and historically disenfranchised voters. I mean, those of us who worked on elections, we know that election data is sophisticated. And again, AI relies and thrives on data. And so, as I said in my previous statements, we all have seen those examples of past campaigns using certain tactics to target certain voters. So that type of campaign targeting is going to continue. And I think with the use of AI, has potential to really, unfortunately, suppress certain communities. So, of course, I think we should all worry about the unscrupulous and unlawful campaign tactics that will be supercharged with AI technology.
Oh, that's such a great point. I recently attended a panel where some really wonderful nonprofit groups out of the Bay Area were pointing out that their communities are already being subjected to AI in very targeted ways. So, for example, individuals who have posted comments, for example, about affirmative action, just as an example, are actually targeted then with messaging on that particular issue. So I know we often think of AI and we use that term now in a way that it's somewhat global. But one of the most important things, of course, that we think about in terms of voter suppression tactics is that ability with artificial intelligence to target an actual individual's priorities and perceptions about life and attempt to manipulate in that way. I'm sure that's one of the great challenges that the ACLU is going to face in its efforts to try to combat that type of voter suppression. Yes?
Yeah, certainly. I mean, I think we're in this time where we're really trying to be mindful and keep an eye open, ears open as well, to really just identify what's going on and then find ways to be able to not just mitigate some of those concerns, but also find solutions. And so I think for us, it's incredibly important to be part of this group to be able to find some of the solutions and craft those before AI really gets ahead of us.
Yes, and it strikes me that with the ACLU having historically been such a protector of the First Amendment and free speech, you find yourself probably in this tension in a way, right? Because on the one hand, you're trying to make sure that AI and social media disinformation isn't manipulating vulnerable communities, and at the same time, you have to specifically focus on the need to protect the First Amendment. How is that a challenge?
The thing about working on this issue is that we know, for example, that that misinformation and disinformation cause real harms. We know that. We don't.
Right.
I think where the issue comes is that sometimes people's first instinct is to suggest giving the government broad powers to suppress the information and criminalize those who spread it. But that can run afoul of the First Amendment. So in crafting a solution, we should be worrisome about giving the government too much power to decide what is misinformation and disinformation and what is not. And I think there was a question in the comment about, what's the definition of misinformation and disinformation? Because I think if we give the government a power to decide what qualifies as misinformation and disinformation, then the government can potentially use it to suppress legitimate dissent if it disagrees with the message and considers it misinformation or disinformation.
Angelica, thank you so much. You've certainly underscored the challenges that face policymakers in Sacramento and, of course, Washington, D.C. and across the world right now in trying to strike that balance. We've certainly seen how governments abroad can use these powers in very, very deleterious ways. So thank you very much for your participation. I'm glad you're participating in CITED as well. I now want to introduce Laura Mather, who is a really great member of the CITED team now. Laura started her career in the U.S. intelligence service. So I just want to show you the breadth of people that we have in our organization now. And she was one of the folks then who became one of the first people on eBay's trust and safety team, which goes back some distance, I know, Laura, fighting cybercrime for both eBay and PayPal. In 2008, Laura founded her own cybersecurity company that protected brands like, let's see, small companies like Bank of America, Xbox, Citibank, and Apple. Laura is currently on the advisory boards of several cybersecurity companies, and thankfully she's on our advisory board as well. So I would like to invite Laura, if you would, to just make a few comments, and then I've got some hopefully tough questions for you.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Drew. I am thrilled to be working with CITED, thrilled with what CITED is looking to do. I have to say that I actually come to this with a bit of optimism. Having fought cyber criminals for 2 decades now, a very long time, I can hope that we have learned a lot of lessons that are applicable to the fight we are undertaking now. One of the lessons we learned back in 2003 is that bad actors move very fast. They are able to try new things whenever they want. They are able to do whatever they want to try and achieve their end goals. As the good guys in this situation, we're actually beholden to various checks and balances, whether that is regulatory, whether that is a corporation who has to be sure that they do QA, that they are protecting their members. We are beholden to some of those things that our adversaries are not beholden to. And unfortunately, when we were fighting cybercrime in the early 2000s, we didn't do a very good job of getting ahead of the criminals, especially regulation-wise. And because it took us so long to get regulations in place, there were a lot of people who were harmed, whether that was financially, it can be emotionally, it could just be a time suck to have to get your identity back when it's stolen. There are all of these things that happen to people because it took us so long to put things in place to protect the internet population. What we are seeing now scares me a lot. It is unprecedented, the speed at which these adversaries, these bad actors are moving. With AI, with social network, they are able to get their messages out. They are able to test their technologies, their techniques way faster than they were back in 2003 when I first started this. So what I really hope is that we learn the lessons that we so painfully came through 2 decades ago, and we use those scars to actually do a better job this time, to get things in place more quickly, because it is so critical that we protect our democracy from these bad actors.
You know, I'm wondering, we're going to move quickly here, but if I could just throw one quick question at you in terms of any examples of kind of how quickly cyber criminals can move. I know in your experience, it can be really fast, right?
So as an example, when I was at eBay, we had a particular technology we were going to launch in order to protect our members from a certain type of cybercrime. As you may imagine, in a big company, it took us, I don't know, 6 or 8 months to plan the technology, to develop it, to QA it, to get it launched. It took the criminals about 15 seconds to respond because they had anticipated what we were going to launch. And so this is just the type of threat that we're up against, is that the criminals can respond exceptionally quickly.
Wow. And in the era now of AI, needless to say, that type of time frame is simply going to be unuseful.
Exactly. And we're just going to be against this day after day after day. So we've got to get things in place that are going to help us to prevent that type of response.
Well, thank you so much, Laura. You know, your participation shows we really have to have a very broad level of experience at CITED to deal with some of these really practical technology issues. In the policy world, we tend not to know any of the stuff that you're talking about. So we're very grateful to have you. Thank you.
I'm thrilled to be here. Thanks so much.
You bet. I'm going to switch now to Bill Wong, who I've known for over 20 years in my work in the legislature. And Bill's a huge asset to our work now. He's an author of an Amazon political leadership bestseller, Better to Win, and an award-winning political consultant with over 30 years of experience. I've known Bill as a senior political advisor to various California leaders, including Assemblymember Anthony Rendon, who became the longest-serving Speaker of the Assembly since Willie Brown, which is quite something. And Bill's regularly quoted, I know, in various national political media publications. And so, Bill, thank you so much. If you could just educate us a little bit from your experiences, both an insider in the legislature and a political consultant. I'll have some questions for you as well afterwards.
Yeah, thanks, Drew, and thanks, Common Cause, for starting this project. I think this is essential for protecting democracy. I think that building on what the previous speakers have talked about, AI is definitely a danger. And here's the background of why. It's like, one is that it has kind of democratized agendas. So instead of just geopolitical or partisan, it could just be some random anarchist that's out there that can utilize this type of technology to destabilize or to address, some type of grievance against the greater society that's out there. So we have to really treat this very seriously, because it has basically put, a thermonuclear warhead in the hands of just anybody that's out there. I think politically, where this is going to have the biggest impact is on marginal races. And even though it may not necessarily be the agenda of the person who's deploying it, it could have some significant impacts, because control of Congress is very narrow. It's only by 5 votes. Those races are going to be in very tight races. And this is where AI can and is most likely going to be utilized to suppress votes of key populations in order to throw an election one way or the other. So there are various techniques that are available that are out there that they can utilize in order to have a great impact in just 1 or 2 races or 5 races that will control the control of Congress, that could lead to global conflicts, civil war, or deregulation that could hurt the economy and could hurt the stability of everyday Americans, could lead to further exacerbated government shutdown as a result of these types of things. But it's not necessarily a partisan objective. It could just be any type of random things. This is what's so scary about it, is like you don't know necessarily where it's coming from. But I do think that one of the key things, and this is probably why I'm on this part of the panel, is that it is what is done to the industry of political campaigning. So we used to say that politics was a knife fight in a phone booth. Now what AI has done is created a situation that is an AR-15 in a schoolyard. It is now made everything light speed. AI doesn't need to eat. It doesn't need to be fed. It doesn't need to sleep. It doesn't need to be paid. So anybody with a very small number of resources could mobilize this mechanical type of warhead and do tremendous amount of damage without having a human factor in there to apply, any type of moral standards.
Yeah, that's just so such a powerful way to describe this. I'm wondering, what are some of the dangerous ways now that you're thinking, Bill, AI will be specifically used in future political campaigns?
I think the scariest thing is, and has already been utilized, is that the speed and the ability for it to metastasize. Because in the past, when we did our typical campaign shenanigans, we would have to like build out a troll farm with 100 people, pay them minimum wage, get them all in one place, and give them a script, which they would probably deliver not so well. So now the problem with AI is you could now do that out of a laptop somewhere, and you wouldn't have, for example, if you had like a troll farm, there could be some conscientious objector that says, "Oh my God, we're doing something horrible," and then they could report it to authorities. It's like if you deploy AI, that doesn't happen. So we've seen the same the techniques are not going to change. It's about kind of taking advantage of people's inattention or gullibility in order to in a very small window of time control their behavior. So in other nations, like in Myanmar, there's a manufactured campaign to scapegoat the Rohingya, and that resulted in a genocide that also led to a regime change. So that's already happening, and then you actually sent out an article that quotes CNN that foreign operatives have posted striking AI-made images depicting the Statue of Liberty and the Black Lives Matter movement on social media in a campaign that Microsoft said focuses on denigrating U.S. political figures and symbols as a way to create chaos and suppress voter turnout and affect the turnout of elections, and also trust in government and democracy. So it's already happening. And we don't even know, how many of these things are out there, but it's already being deployed to create that type of chaotic situation that's going to make an orderly democratic election occur more and more difficult.
Let me just real quickly, are there any thoughts that you've given to what we need to most urgently think about to address the disinformation challenges in elections right now? Where's your thinking at on that?
I think that's what's so important about the CITED effort is that one, we're the first state to do it. And then secondly, there's some action. I think that, with the actors that are out there, like anything, like anybody who's a parent out there, that if the kids know that the parents are watching, they're going to be less likely to engage in the negative behavior. Not to say that you're going to be completely successful, but the very fact that actors out there know that there is an active, aggressive effort to mitigate what is going to be utilized out there is important. And you, as a consultant to the legislature, knows it's like it takes us forever to pass a law. But to the extent that we have things in the hopper, that there is oversight, that there's going to be hearings, that there's going to be continued discussions about stuff. Ultimately, I think that even if there are discussions about increasing penalties, increasing oversight, increasing accountability and transparency into the political process in California, it is going to pump the brakes on people getting stupid ideas about what they can get away with, particularly in California, I think, because I don't know the other states, is that ultimately right now there's an ambiguity with regard to who is responsible for enforcing, fair elections. Is it DOJ? Is it US DOJ? Is it FPPC? Is it Secretary of State's office? Is unclear. So to the extent that we can bring in focus and attention to how we can make sure that we enforce ethical behavior, enforce transparency and accountability, that it is going to, at least in the short term, create a hedge for those people who are even thinking about deploying those types of unethical behaviors utilizing AI.
That's such an excellent point. Thank you so much, Bill, because it's nice to underscore the educational and persuasive impact, if you will, that even introducing legislation can have to create those conversations and potentially put some pressure on the technology companies to stand up and explain why it is they can't do more. So thank you very much for that. Okay, we're going to turn now over to another excellent participant in the CITED enterprise here, Ella Irwin. Ella has had senior leadership roles in the financial services and technology industries for over 2 decades. And during this time, she's helped small and large organizations develop product risk strategies and platform capabilities designed to protect consumers from a broad range of fraud and abuse risks. Most recently, Ella was head of trust and safety for Twitter before she left there, where she had worked hard to fight against disinformation, but we kind of know what happened after Ella left. Ella, it's great to have you. I want you to please chat a little bit, just like Bill just did, about your perspectives right now as we face these enormous challenges. And then, of course, I'll have some questions for you as well.
Awesome. Thanks, Drew. Well, hello, everyone. And as Drew mentioned, I have worked for multiple different technology companies, and it has been amazing to see the ongoing innovation at these companies and how that innovation can change people's lives for the better. The work I do specifically involves building things that help protect consumers and the organizations from abuse. So I've learned a lot about bad actors and bad behavior over the years. Disinformation, which is really scaled and sort of a sophisticated form of fraud, has become an increasingly powerful weapon. And, you know, as you've heard from the folks that spoke before me, there is a lot of danger. It can lead to violence, civil unrest, even cause unnecessary illness and death. And the bad actors who are engaging in disinformation are typically taking advantage of 5 things. 1, the amount of information we're all being overwhelmed with daily. 2, the anonymity that many companies offer to users. 3, the speed at which they can get disinformation out to the public. 4, the scale at which they can get disinformation out. And 5, the lack of any real criminal penalties for engaging in disinformation. Can you imagine someone relatively unknown getting access to a really powerful weapon that can harm millions of people in less than 5 minutes? Imagine them using that weapon and then causing widespread harm and just walking away without any consequences. Well, that's what's happening every day. And so we need to change how we deal with disinformation. And the reality is no one company can solve for something this complex and sophisticated all on their very own. Similar to many other forms of fraud and abuse schemes that have impacted people over the years, this really does require a collaborative effort between governments and companies. So I'm really excited about the work being done by this group and the potential for reasonable and effective legislation that both enables technology and protects consumers from that technology being weaponized by bad actors. Over to you, Drew.
Wow, thank you. I love those 5 points that you just made, which shows the complexity that not only the platforms are having to deal with, but that policymakers have to try to navigate and balance. So you've had so much experience with this, Ella, given your years of working in some of these big tech companies trying to protect users from disinformation. Obviously, there's been a walking back by quite a few of them in trying to deal with these problems. Why is that happening? And then, of course, what can we do about trying to get them to reverse those types of decisions?
Well, I think there's a couple of things. So 1, the reality is the amount of effort and cost that goes into fighting disinformation has in a lot of ways become unsustainable. And by the way, in spite of companies collectively spending billions annually on fact checkers and moderators and technology, it hasn't actually really worked that well. A lot of that comes from sort of this original focus having been directed too far downstream, which is always harder and more expensive to do because you're trying to keep up then with billions of posts and photos and videos, and the volume just keeps growing, right?
Right.
So I think, you know, that's certainly one really important point. I think that the other parts are, you know, it is very hard for companies to figure out the source of truth on information all by themselves, right? You're bound to get it wrong, especially when something new is happening or things are evolving very rapidly. I mean, even credible news publications get information wrong when things are happening fast. So the reality is companies have just been trying to navigate this on their own, and that hasn't gone so well. So they definitely need help.
Yeah.
And lastly, I think there's been some damage to trust and reputation for a lot of companies, because in the effort to prevent bad actors spreading disinformation, things got a little confused. And suddenly, instead of focusing on bad actors and true disinformation campaigns, somewhere along the way, the focus sort of broadened and became about policing general public opinions. And that's always going to be a losing battle, right? So we need to regain the focus on true disinformation campaigns.
Which is obviously super hard, as people in the chat have noted. Different people's definitions of disinformation. There's a span of ideas about that. Well, we just have about a minute, so I know there's this concept of friction that you've helped CITED understand. If you could just help our attendees have a sense of what people mean when they say we need to go further upstream and create greater friction that the platforms use for determining who's using their sites.
Yeah, if you think about, disinformation and the points I made earlier about what bad actors are relying on, they're relying on, speed and scale and anonymity. And if you really think about what companies can do to ensure that if they're giving the use of their products and services to someone, a user, that they are checking to ensure that they, for example, know who's using their product, how they're planning on using it, that they are ensuring that before someone can use their products and services at scale, particularly if it's going to affect millions of people, that there's some due diligence that's been done. Questions like, do you know who's using your APIs, for example, right? And what they're using them for? You'd be surprised how many companies don't actually know, right? And so the reality is, that kind of due diligence up front and some of these controls around specific products and features when someone's trying to use your services at scale is really critical. And that's very important. And I think companies are starting to realize that, but it's been a little bit of a slow adoption.
I guess we could call it the Wild West. Yeah, thank you so much, Ella. It's so great to have you participating in our organization and helping us understand technology a little bit better. So really appreciate your participation today. So we're going to go now to our last panelist before we have a quick Q&A. And I'm very excited to introduce him, a true leader in the technology world and someone who really understands the platforms. Brandon Silverman is a policy expert on platform transparency. Welcome, Brandon. He was the former CEO and co-founder of CrowdTangle, a social media monitoring tool required by Meta that was used by researchers, human rights groups, and journalists all over the world to better understand social media. And gosh knows we need to better understand social media. He's currently a Knight Fellow at the George Washington Institute for Democracy, Data, and Politics. I think at Georgetown, is that right, Brandon?
George Washington.
George Washington, great, thank you. Yeah, and a founding fellow at the Integrity Institute. He advises a wide range of civil society groups in Europe and is an international speaker on a lot of these issues and how to monitor and study the internet. We're just so thrilled to have your participation. I don't know how we convince you to do this, but I think it's because you care about the issues. So if you will, Brandon, just give some remarks, and then I'm going to have some tough questions for you.
Great. Yeah, thank you so much for the warm introduction, and yeah, very honored to be here. And I'm happy to go on at length about why I'm here, which is and why I think this is so important. But yeah, I'll just start with with my background, one of the things it meant in the real world was that the work I did at CrowdTangle while we were at Meta between 2017 and 2020 was we facilitated a lot of the way that Facebook was transparent with the outside world. And that meant collaborating specifically around a lot of elections and pro-democracy work. And that meant partnering with human rights organizations, election protection groups, with Common Cause, with lots of others. So it's a space where I've been in for a number of years and have gotten very red-pilled on how important it is for those of us who care about a lot of these issues. So I'll just say at the top, just, there are 4 things that stand out to me in particular, but they are all wrapped up with this basic idea that when it comes to managing the role and the impact that AI is going to have on our democracy, I think the really good news is that we do not have to start from scratch. We have several decades of learning about how to regulate the internet, a lot of which applies and can be put to use around AI, and that we should be looking back over the last few years to take some of the lessons away. And the ones that stand out to me are, first, that this is going to be a never-ending project. AI is now going to be a part and parcel of our entire digital experience, and in some cases, a lot of our kind of real-world analog experiences as well. So there's no single piece of legislation. There's no perfect set of community guidelines or operations that are going to solve this. It's just going to be an ongoing work that we're going to be doing for the rest of our lives. And part of that is, I think one extension of that, but also one of the biggest learnings, I think, over the last several decades, is that managing these public spaces should be a collaborative process that isn't left up to a handful of private companies, isn't left entirely up to governments, but is a collaborative effort and a real partnership between private sector, civil society, and government, all helping play a role in what the rules of the road are for these large public spaces. And that, in part, the goal of that is to make sure that we are incorporating feedback from communities that oftentimes bear a disproportionate amount of the harm, but aren't necessarily a disproportionate part of the market upside for these platforms. I think third, and somebody else also mentioned this, and I'll just echo it, is I think we all want to be getting ahead of some of the harms, but I think we also don't want to lose sight of what are some of the really important upsides. There are really powerful, exciting ways that AI could help increase voter turnout, improve media literacy, like lots of amazing opportunities. And our goal is to try and find a balance between those. And then lastly, and this is not a shock for anybody who's ever read anything I've said or heard me talk at all publicly, but for me, the foundation of a lot of what we want to try and achieve starts with transparency. That even when it comes down to identifying what are the biggest harms, what are the biggest risks, what we need is real data and empirical evidence that will help guide us. And I think too often I'm reminded of the anecdote of the cop who shows up at a bar and he sees a guy outside the bar who's fumbling around on the ground underneath a lamppost, and he says, "What are you doing?" And the guy says, "Well, I'm looking for my keys." And he said, "Well, where did you see them last?" And he pointed over off towards a dark, huge parking lot. And the cop's like, "Well, why are you looking here?" He's like, "Well, this is where the light is." And I think that phenomena has defined so much of like us looking and trying to manage and regulate the internet, when there's just a lot of it is hidden behind black boxes. And so I think what you'll hear me repeat a lot is part of the role of, I think, government, but also civil society and organizations like CITED, is to try and facilitate more transparency, more openness, and use that as a starting place for informing a lot of the work we do. So
wow. I love that anecdote. That's where the light is. Well, I can tell you that you're helping shed a whole bunch of light for us, and we're so grateful to have you. I want to ask you about, since I know you've actually had an international focus, Brandon, on these issues, are there any lessons we can learn from other countries? I'm often hearing, of course, that the real leaders so far on a lot of these issues are the EU as opposed to the United States, which I think is a great tragedy, considering we're the foundings of so many of these technology platforms, et cetera. So what lessons, if any, can we start to think about coming out of the EU and other countries on these issues?
Yeah. I mean, I think there's both lessons for what to do, and in some cases lessons for what not to do, and also probably some lessons for what we can't even do at all. But I think, so they have been kind of oftentimes years, some cases decades ahead of the US on regulating different parts of the internet. It started in some cases with copyright, but then really took off with, they passed something called a GDPR, which was a sweeping privacy law in Europe. Here in the US, California has passed the privacy law, which is great, but we have no federal privacy protection, which is a major, I think, black eye for those of us who believe in the ability of the federal government to do any of this work. But they have continued to go past that. And this last August, they passed something called both the Digital Markets Act, which is designed to be a pro-competition, antitrust set of rules that would mirror a lot of what was attempted to done in Congress, but didn't pass. But then also something called the Digital Services Act, which is designed specifically around a lot of issues I think we're talking about around elections, social issues, political issues, civic issues, et cetera. And the foundation of it was both what are called risk assessments, which is requiring platforms to look at the potential harms and report to the government how they are thinking about dealing with them. But then secondly is an enormous amount of transparency. And so that's the second major pillar of the entire Digital Services Act. I think there's a lot that we can take away from what they did and what is already starting to work and not work. It's still very nascent. It's going to take several years for it fully to come into focus. The biggest challenge, of course, is Europe doesn't have the First Amendment. And so we have to figure out how to craft transparency regulations that I think are thoughtful and mindful of how to do that in a First Amendment protecting way. But there are a lot of lessons to be had from there. And I think the other one, I'll just, because it also came up, is I think for this entire debate, it's incredibly important to define terms. And so this question of what is disinformation, I think is a really, really important one. The way I think about it is essentially, it has become a catch-all for what are essentially three different buckets. One is a more narrow one, which is state-sponsored influence operations. Mm-hmm. It is when a government directly sponsors an attempt to push political propaganda in another country with the goal of trying to disrupt some sort of political, civil, or social activity in the country. The second one is deliberately untrue, what we call lawful but awful. It does not violate any of the terms of a platform. It might be totally authentic people, but saying things that are deliberately untrue, but not connected to a government, et cetera. And then the third one is probably in some ways, I think, the largest and the hardest to solve, which is technically true, but misleading. And that makes up an enormous amount of political and civic discourse. And is oftentimes,
Yeah, no, I'm sorry to interrupt. I was going to say that's a perfect segue to the last question of our panel and you, which I want to ask you, which is obviously this is tough stuff. It's been very alarming to read this past number of months that the platforms are announcing that they're going in exactly in a U-turn where they're saying, okay, we've had enough of this. We're going to cut most of our trust and safety folks. We're getting out of this business. Why are they doing this?
Yeah, I mean, I'll let some of the other panelists also jump in, but my take on it is, I think it is partly we're shooting ourselves in the foot here in the US. I think the platforms feel torn between two diametrically opposed criticisms. One is that they are censoring far too much on the platforms. And the second is that they're shirking their responsibilities by allowing too much. And I think they have internally gotten to a place where a lot of them have decided that the voluntary efforts are not worth it. And instead they want to wait and just simply let lawmakers tell them what they should do and not do. The problem there, or in some cases, maybe the convenient reality for some of the platforms, is that it is very hard for the federal government to pass anything. So then the question is, are states like California and others going to step up and do anything? And that's partly why I'm excited about everything CITED is doing. But I think they are caught between those two things. And I think they are also, there's some degree to which some of these problems are society-wide problems. If you're talking about true but misleading content, I don't think, I personally don't think it should be any single private company should resolve those tensions. But I think there are ways in which they can be more constructive players than they have been, especially around facilitating collaboration with civil society, with academics and researchers, election protection groups, being more open, being more accountable, more transparent. And there's an enormous opportunity for a state like California to play in helping set the rules of the road around some of that.
Wow. If I can just quote that last sentence you just said, I think that will support the need for CITED for some time to come. Thank you very much, Brandon. Really appreciate it. We're going to just have a few minutes, as is always the case, because you bring together this great collection of panelists who have so much to offer, and the time flies. But we've got a few minutes for Q&A, and I want to turn to to Leora Gershenson, who has been just retired from being Deputy Chief Counsel at the California Legislature's Judiciary Committee for almost 2 decades. And we're very blessed to have Leora as one of the staff now at CITED. And Leora, I think you kept track of a couple questions or key questions that we can sneak in for the last 7 minutes or so here. If you could mention one question real quick, and we'll see who gets tagged with answering it.
Sure. The first question actually came in at about 10:16 from an anonymous person. Does CITED have any influence or collaborative efforts with social media platforms to address the spread of deepfakes, especially concerning misinformation about current or future political candidates? I thought I would throw that to, we have 3 people here with significant social media background working with companies. Ella or Laura or Brandon, would you like to take that in terms of the goal of trying to work at, I think Drew mentioned earlier, we were looking not just at sticks, but certainly at carrots as well.
Yeah, maybe we should throw that one to Brandon, if you don't mind, Brandon, because you've been inside working with folks at Meta, for example, for a number of years. And I know you've told me that we shouldn't always just assume that they don't want to collaborate and want to just stay shut down. I know that's true with you, Ella, as well. So Brandon, maybe you could just quickly give some insights on that.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is one of the single biggest levers we have and should be leaning on going forward, which is collaboration between private companies, civil societies, academics, researchers, experts, and government. And all 3 need a seat at the table and as much of these issues as possible. And we don't want private companies deciding all these issues by themselves. We don't want the governments deciding all these issues by themselves. And oftentimes it is the people on the ground in the communities who have the most expertise, the most knowledge, who are the ones who even have the ability to help inform a lot of these decisions. So I think we have to find ways to make these collaborations a more regular part of how we manage the internet, is how I would answer that. Curious to listen.
And I would only tell you that stay tuned, because you're going to be forced to help in that regard. Ella, maybe just a minute on that, because you've been on the inside so many times. You can tell us, are there going to be voices there that want to listen to us?
I think it's true for most companies. I would just echo what Brandon said. Most companies want to participate. They want to collaborate. They want to find solutions. There's a lot of smart people at these organizations who are trying to figure out how to solve these problems and looking for help and partnership. So I absolutely do think it's a collaborative environment.
Excellent. Thank you for that. Leora, we have time for another one if you want to throw one out here for us.
Sure. I think this one is probably best thrown Bill's way. Question is, will the policy reforms CITED considers include increasing the authority and capacity of campaign regulatory agencies like the FPPC to be more assertive in protecting voters' rights to be accurately informed?
Bill, the great challenge.
My answer is I hope so. I mean, that has to be the crux of it. I mean, I think that the Political Reform Act needs to be taken a look at, and I think that the agencies that are in charge of enforcement need to have the resources in order to be able to enforce the laws. I think that that's where the problem is right now. They're you have people that have to get registered for and certified to cut your hair, but there's really no way to oversight, like campaign consultants. There's professional associations that enforce a certain ethical behavior, but none of them are enforced by law or by regulation. So when you're dealing with something as important as democracy, my hope is that is part of the discussion.
Oh, excellent. Thank you so much, Bill. Leora, let's grab another one.
Sure. This question was addressed to Jonathan, but I think that anyone on the panel, or Drew, you might be able to answer this one. Legislation so far is encouraging, but contains gaps. E.g., the scope is limited to deepfakes involving candidates, which wouldn't address content intended to suppress or interfere with voter turnout. For example, manipulative content about voting requirements from fake organizations, similar to certain robocalls used in the last presidential elections. Incendiary deepfakes, videos of law enforcement incidents, or others could spark civil unrest on election eve. Are there ways we are looking at, CITED is looking at trying to address these issues?
Well, of course, I'll quickly say the answer is absolutely, and I'll underscore all of the great points all of the panelists made about these great challenges that we face as we look at these issues, whether it's Section 230 under federal law, as well as, of course, the First Amendment. But I think if you don't mind, Bill, I'll throw it back at you again, because this really gets into that whole question again of trying to achieve regulations in the midst of the First Amendment.
Yeah, I think the biggest challenge is having a framework that is nimble, because like Ella said, like this is changing, and also Laura, like this is changing so fast that if we don't have a setup that can react and respond and try to add friction to how things are going, it's not going to be successful. And you all have seen how slow it takes to get legislation passed, implemented, and then enforced. Like we have to have as part of the foundation of this effort a very nimble and agile type of effort.
Yeah, and I would just underscore that, Bill, that time is never our friend in many ways, but certainly when it comes to enacting law, we know that it seems virtually impossible at the federal level, and at the state level, it takes time. I want to underscore that CITED will also be focusing very much so on an educational component, working with the public, with the press, et cetera, trying to get a lot of these issues out there so that people are more able to navigate what we know will be a pretty ripe disinformation arena that they have to get through. I think we have time for just one more, a final question, Leora.
Okay, I think that our best final question is using Bill's words from earlier, AI doesn't eat, sleep, need to be paid, etc. So are we toast? Is there any hope? What does it look like?
Well, golly, if you don't mind, I'm going to force Brandon to answer that one. Is there any hope, or are we toast? I love that as our final question of the morning.
Well, I mean, in all transparency, I'm a congenital optimist, but so I'm biased, but I absolutely think there's hope. I mean, the community I come from is the trust and safety community that are the kind of the professional integrity staff in a lot of these platforms. And, I was polling some of them this morning just to double check some of my own thoughts and comments. And, so much of the work done on platforms around elections touches deep-seated historical, like foundational society-wide issues inside places that any new technology that's coming has a very real chance of exacerbating those things, but it is not going to wholly and fundamentally upend them, at least in my opinion.
I love it. I love
it. And like I said, there are also an amazing amount of opportunities around steering this as a force for good, for increasing voter turnout, for increasing voter awareness, media literacy, so many different things that I think we do actually a disservice if we, I think, don't think about the ways in which this could, I think, actually advance all the stuff we care about.
Thank you so much. Thank you, panelists. Thank you so much. Jonathan Stein, you've put this all together. Thank you for your incredible work. I want to turn it to you for 60 seconds. We'll just be 1 minute over if everyone will be patient. And Jonathan, you can close us down.
Thank you, Drew, and thank you to our panelists today. Thank you to everyone who attended. We are looking forward to working with you on what I think Brandon earlier said was a never-ending project. We are hopeful. We are optimistic. But we know that, one, this will take all of us: government, philanthropy, nonprofits, tech, academia, everyone. So we invite you to visit cited.tech, and we invite you to get in touch at info@cited.tech. Together, we can tackle these grave threats to our democracy. And two, we know that a challenge that's enormous requires multiple strategies employed simultaneously. So Drew mentioned some of this. We're going to lead a legislative strategy in 2024. We hope to host events to raise the visibility of these issues. We hope to work in coalition with civil rights, civic engagement, GOTV, and power building partners. And critically, we hope to do voter education to help the public understand that they need to be smarter, more skeptical consumers of political information. But together, with all those tools and working as a group, we can get this done. Thank you all for being here. Thank you for your partnership, and have a wonderful day.